planned it, I said into the phone. My brother asked if I was sure. I told him I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. Then I walked back into my own living room, sat down in my own chair, and poured myself a glass of sweet tea like nothing had happened. Because as far as my son-in-law was concerned, nothing had. He was still standing there with that smirk on his face, arms crossed, waiting for me to beg. I didn't beg. Let me go back 2 years, because that's where this really starts. Not at Christmas, not even close. 2 years ago, my daughter Sylvia married a man named Troy. I want to be fair here. When she first brought him home, I didn't dislike him. He was charming in the way that some men are charming, the way a car salesman is charming. He laughed at my jokes, helped carry groceries, called me sir every other sentence. My late wife Gloria would have seen through him in about 45 seconds. She always had a radar for men like Troy. I didn't. That's on me. Sylvia was 34 when they got married, old enough to make her own choices, and I respected that. She'd had a hard few years, a divorce in her late 20s, some rough patches financially, and when Troy came along, she seemed genuinely happy. That mattered more to me than my gut feeling. I'm 67 years old. I spent 41 years as a structural engineer. I built a modest life, saved carefully, paid off my house in Greenville, South Carolina, and retired with enough to live comfortably and leave something behind for my kids. Not a fortune. Just the kind of money a man feels good about when he looks back on his life and thinks, at least I didn't waste it. Sylvia knew the house would go to her and her younger brother, Clint, when I was gone. I never hid that from anyone. It was in my will, clear as day. I think that's when Troy started doing the math. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about people like him. They don't come at you directly. They come at you sideways. Little comments at dinner. Dad, you really don't need all this space, do you? Suggestions that I should look into assisted living, even though I was healthy, active, still driving myself everywhere and playing golf twice a week. Just thinking about your future, he'd say, and smile like he was doing me a favor. Then, about 8 months after the wedding, he brought up the investment. He was starting a business, he said, a logistics company. He had a partner, he had a contract lined up with a regional distribution center. All he needed was startup capital. He wasn't asking for a handout. He was offering me an equity stake, 15% of the company for a $60,000 investment. I told him I'd think about it. I did think about it. I thought about it for about 2 weeks, talked to my accountant, and then politely declined. I kept it simple. I didn't invest in private businesses, especially ones without a track record. No hard feelings. Troy smiled and said he understood completely. That was the last time he smiled at me like he meant it. Things changed slowly after that. Sylvia started canceling our Sunday dinners. When I called, she sounded distracted, sometimes even irritated, like I'd interrupted something. At Christmas that year, she and Troy were in Florida with his family. I spent the holiday with Clint and his wife, which was fine. But I noticed the shift. I just didn't know yet what was behind it. In February, I got a letter from my bank. It was a notification about a change request on one of my accounts, specifically a joint savings account I had set up years ago with Sylvia. We'd opened it when she was going through her divorce, just so she'd have access to emergency funds if she needed them. She'd never touched it. There was about $42,000 in it, built up slowly over the years. The change request was to add a secondary authorized user. The name on the request was Troy's. I called the bank that afternoon. The branch manager confirmed that someone had come in with documentation, a signed authorization form with my signature on it, requesting the addition. The manager was apologetic. The signature had looked legitimate. They had processed it. I had never signed anything. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time staring at the wall. Then I called my attorney. My attorney is a woman named Patricia. No, wait, I need to stop. I promised myself I'd tell this straight. Her name is Beverly Marsh. She's been my attorney for 19 years, handled my estate planning, my retirement documents, Gloria's trust after she passed. If there's one person in this world who knows every piece of paper with my name on it, it's Beverly. I drove to her office the next morning without calling ahead. Her assistant tried to tell me she was in a meeting. I sat down in the waiting room and said I'd wait however long it took. Beverly came out 11 minutes later, took one look at my face, and waved me inside. I showed her the bank's letter. I told her what they'd told me on the phone. I told her I had not signed any authorization form ever for Troy to have access to that account. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Martin, I need you to tell me everything." And I did. Here is what Beverly and I pieced together over the following 3 weeks with the help of a forensic accountant she brought in. Troy had not started one business. He had started 3. All of them shells, all of them registered in South Carolina under variations of his name and a partner I'd never heard of. None of them had ever turned a profit. 2 of them had outstanding debts. The authorization form he'd submitted to the bank had been forged. Beverly compared it to every legitimate document with my signature on file. The handwriting was close, close enough to fool a teller, but not close enough to fool a forensic examiner. And there was one more thing. But 6 months prior, someone had filed a change of address form with the South Carolina DMV using my name and social security number, routing certain correspondence to a P.O. box in Spartanburg. I'd never owned a P.O. box in Spartanburg. Beverly looked at me across her desk and used a word I hadn't expected. "Martin," she said, "this is identity fraud." I already knew. I just needed to hear it said out loud. I want to explain something here because I've thought about it a lot since then. My first instinct was to call Sylvia. Not to confront her, not to accuse her, just to hear her voice, honestly, and figure out whether she knew. Whether the woman I had raised, the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap watching baseball, was part of this or a victim of it herself. I almost called her 4 separate times over those 3 weeks. Every time Beverly talked me down. "Not yet," she'd say. "If she tells him, he moves money. If he moves money, we lose the trail. Wait." Waiting was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than watching Gloria decline. Harder than anything, because with Gloria there was nothing to be done. With this, there was, and I had to hold still. So I held still. Beverly filed a report with local law enforcement and the South Carolina Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. The forensic accountant provided documentation. The bank flagged the account and froze the additional authorization pending investigation. Then we waited some more. It was Clint who finally gave me the information I needed to move forward. He'd seen Troy at a sports bar in downtown Greenville with a man he didn't recognize. They were deep in conversation, papers on the table. Clint, bless him, had the presence of mind to sit nearby and listen. He called me that night. "Dad," he said, "I think Troy is trying to sell the house." Not his house, my house. Clint had caught just enough of the conversation, the address, the phrase estate transfer, the mention of a quitclaim deed, to know what direction this was heading. Troy had apparently told the other man, a developer it sounded like, that the property would be available soon. My property. The house Gloria and I had bought in 1989, where we raised 2 kids, where I'd built a back porch with my own hands over one summer when the kids were small. That property. I called Beverly at 9 o'clock that night. "It's time," I said. She agreed. "Here's what most people don't understand about a plan like this. You don't make it angry. Anger is loud, and loud tips people off. You make it calm. You make it patient. You make it so that the other person doesn't see it coming until they're already inside it." Beverly had been in contact with law enforcement for weeks. The investigation was ready. What they needed was for Troy to make one more confirmable move, one clear documented attempt to act on the forged authorization or the fraudulent property filing, and then they'd have everything they needed for an arrest. We decided Christmas would be the moment. Sylvia had, for the first time in 2 years, invited me for the holiday. I suspected Troy had suggested it, keeping me close, keeping me unsuspicious, maybe even looking for an opportunity. I said yes. I called my brother, who lives 40 minutes outside of Greenville, and I told him to be ready. He didn't ask for details. We've known each other for 64 years. When I say be ready, he's ready. Christmas morning. Sylvia's house, the one she and Troy rented, not mine, not yet, was warm and smelled like cinnamon. She'd made an effort. I could see it. The tree was decorated, there was food in the kitchen, her 2 kids from her first marriage were running around in their pajamas, For a few hours, I let myself just be there. Grandkids on my lap, football on in the background, Sylvia handing me coffee the way I like it, black with half a sugar. Troy was cordial, friendly even. He helped set the table for dinner. He carved the roast. He laughed and made conversation and did everything a man does when he wants someone to believe there is nothing to see here. After dinner, when the kids were in the other room and Sylvia was in the kitchen, Troy sat down across from me with a folder. He said he'd been going over some estate planning information just to help me think through options. He said he found a financial product that could simplify the property transfer process, reduce estate taxes, something along those lines. He pushed a document across the coffee table. I looked at it without picking it up. It was a quitclaim deed for my property, already filled out. My name, the address, and a transfer to a limited liability company I had never heard of. There was a line at the bottom for my signature. I looked at him for a long moment. "Troy," I said, "is this your final offer?" He blinked. "Sorry?" "Before we do this," I said, "I want to make sure you've thought it through." He started to say something about it being standard procedure. I stopped listening. I reached into my jacket pocket, took out my phone, and sent a text to my brother. One word. No. I stood up, went to the kitchen, and told Sylvia there were some people outside who needed to come in. She looked confused. "What people?" "Law enforcement," I said. "Baby girl, I need you to sit down." What happened in the next 20 minutes is something I replay in my mind sometimes, not with satisfaction. I want to be honest about that, but with a complicated kind of grief. Because Sylvia's face, when the detective came through the door and explained why they were there, was not the face of a conspirator. It was the face of a woman who had just realized that the person she'd built a life with had been using her as a vehicle to get to her father. She hadn't known about the forged signature. She hadn't known about the identity fraud. She hadn't known about the shell companies or the P.O. box in Spartanburg. Troy was arrested on charges of identity fraud, forgery, and attempted property fraud. He was handcuffed in his own living room on Christmas afternoon while his stepchildren watched from the hallway, and Sylvia stood at the kitchen counter with both hands pressed flat against the marble, like she needed something solid to hold on to. I didn't look at him when they walked him out. There was nothing left to say. In the weeks that followed, Beverly worked with Sylvia's attorney to untangle the financial mess Troy had created. The savings account was fully restored, and the fraudulent authorization was rescinded. The quitclaim deed had never been filed, so the property remained mine without contest. The shell companies were under investigation, and his business partner, the man Clint had seen at the sports bar, turned out to have outstanding warrants in 2 other states. Sylvia called me on New Year's Eve. We talked for a long time. There were things said that needed to be said. There were silences that needed to be sat in. She was angry, not at me, she was careful to say, but at herself, for not seeing it, for maybe not wanting to see it. I told her that wasn't something to be ashamed of. People like Troy count on exactly that. They find the people who love most openly, and they set up shop right next to that love like it's a resource. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said. "I know," I said. "Me too. I'm sitting on my back porch right now, the one I built myself the summer Sylvia was 9 and Clint was 6, and they kept bringing me lemonade every 20 minutes because they thought that was how construction worked. The wood is old now, needs a board or 2 replaced, but the bones of it are good. Gloria used to sit out here every morning with her coffee before the rest of us woke up. Sometimes I come out here just to be in the same air she used to breathe. My house is still mine. The savings account is still mine. Sylvia is filing for divorce. It'll be hard. It's always hard. But she's stronger than she knows, and I told her that, and I'll keep telling her until she believes it. Clint came by last Sunday with his kids, and we grilled out and watched football, and the grandkids ran around the yard until it got dark. Just a regular Sunday. Just the kind of afternoon a man works 41 years to be able to have. I learned something from all of this that I didn't expect to learn. The plan was never really about catching Troy, not at its core. The plan was about understanding, finally and completely, that this house, this life, this family, it was worth protecting. And that I was still capable of protecting it. 67 years old, and I learned something new. I'll take that. I keep coming back to the moment Troy slid that quitclaim deed across the coffee table. The way he smiled when he did it, confident, relaxed. like it was already done. What he didn't know, what men like him never seem to account for, is that the people they underestimate have been watching just as carefully as they have. Maybe more carefully. Because when you've spent 67 years building something, you learn to recognize the shape of a threat. You've seen enough of life to know that not every danger announces itself loudly. Some of it comes in carrying a casserole dish and calling you sir. I don't think Troy was born without a conscience. I think he made a series of small choices, each one easier than the last, until the unthinkable became ordinary to him. That's how it works. The first compromise feels significant. By the 10th, you've stopped noticing. He looked at my daughter and saw a way in. He looked at me and saw an old man who wouldn't fight back. Both of those calculations were wrong, but only one of them was cruel. What saved me wasn't luck. It was the discipline to be still when everything in me wanted to move. Beverly told me to wait, and I waited. Clint kept his eyes open when most people would have looked away. I'd spent decades making careful decisions about money, about people, about trust, and when the moment came to draw on all of that, it was there. None of it happened by accident. The patience I showed in those 3 weeks was the same patience I'd practiced for 41 years of showing up to work, honoring my word, building something real instead of something fast. You don't find that kind of steadiness in a crisis. You bring it with you. I think about Sylvia a lot, about the courage it took for her to sit with what she learned that Christmas afternoon, that the person she'd trusted most had been using her love as a tool. There's a particular kind of strength required to look that truth in the face and not collapse under it. She didn't collapse. She made the calls she needed to make, she asked the questions she didn't want to ask, and she started over. That's not a small thing. That's the hardest thing. I've told her this. The fact that Troy fooled her doesn't say anything about her judgment. It says everything about his patience for deception. Good people get taken advantage of because they extend the same good faith they themselves carry. That's not a flaw, but it is a reminder, one I'm passing along to anyone who needs it, that love without discernment is a door left open. The house is still mine. The savings account is still mine. And my daughter is still my daughter. Everything else is paperwork.